Hi,
Hey,
how are you?
how are you? Doing well. How are you?
Okay, fine. And definitely we know how technology is at times. Okay, so let me just get things going. Okay, all right. So great to have all of you joining us on Cyber JA, the place where we discuss all things cyber and GRC. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. All right, thank you very much. Today we have a phenomenal person in the individual Dr. Curtis Blake, someone who I and no doubt many others admire in the GRC and cyberspace for his tremendous contribution to this industry. And we definitely need more people like him to champion the way for upcoming cybersecurity professionals. He unreservedly accepted to join me in a conversation, and I must say that I appreciated him for taking up such an offer at such a short notice. I mean, welcome, Dr. Blake. Nice to have you sharing with us today on Cyber JA.
It's nice to meet you as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so very much. But before we go any further, guys, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I mean, this session is not about me, but it's for us in the cybersecurity community. So, with that said, let's dive into the meat of the matter as Dr. Blake will be sharing insights into his experience as a cybersecurity governance advisor and particularly focusing on the various areas of GRC that can be capitalized on by us upcoming cyber persons to start our career in the cybersecurity industry. And in addition, he will also be sharing his views on the hiring practices that might be contributing to the workforce gap for cybersecurity talents. So, Dr. Blake, for those who might not be familiar with who you are,
Yeah.
welcome to
So,
Cyber J. The
all
floor
right.
is now open to you, sir, to tell us who you are. I
Sure
mean,
thing. So, my name is Dr. Blake Curtis. I've been in the industry
yes.
around about 13, 15 years. Just a little bit about me. I actually grew up in a very poor town called Tishomingo, Mississippi. If you guys have ever seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, that was a
Oh,
radio station.
yes.
Yeah, but that's actually a small town. There was about maybe like 800 or 900 people who lived there. So the running joke is there's probably like 899 because nobody goes back there to live there anymore. But yeah, I grew up very, very humble, very country. Moved over to Memphis, Tennessee, where I would say that's where my IT career started. There was an organization called Job Corps. So Job Corps is a trade school. They offer various things as far as medical operation assistance as well as carpentry. And one of the specialties they offer was computer service technician. And so I always like breaking down different stuff. I was always the kid in the house who was breaking apart everything from power wheels to TVs and
Yes.
everything else. So when I got the opportunity to do that, actually fix things, I just was enamored by it, Mr. Perry. I mean, I did that for roughly 3, 4 months while I was finishing out my high school degree. And the fun fact, I flunked out of high school. Was just going into Memphis, got into a lot of bad stuff, but if it wasn't for me flunking out and then going to trade school to learn about computers, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so after, briefly being there in the trade school, about 2 years later, I was actually diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease that almost took my life. And so during that time, I think I was maybe 196 pounds, 10% body fat. I was in a natural bodybuilding. But then all of a sudden, I was having trouble breathing. I was losing weight rapidly. I couldn't lift myself up out of the bed. And we found out after losing about 60, 70 pounds and going down to 118 pounds, to skin and bones, that what saved me was bodybuilding. Now, at that point, I kind of lagged behind my career. I wasn't really committed to being in IT, but the one thing that bothered me was dying with no purpose or dying with not a story. And so I came very, very intentional about how I wanted to spend the rest of my life and how I wanted to treat people and how I wanted to advocate for young professionals as well as minorities. So I immediately just started getting into CompTIA Plus, start getting into Microsoft, became an engineer. I landed one of my first big careers as a desktop support engineer at FedEx Tech Connect in Collierville, Tennessee. Did that for a little while. I then became a system administrator at Parker Hannifin. Um, Fun fact, I met the love of my life in Memphis, Tennessee, and she gave me an ultimatum, Perry. She said, "Look, I'm moving to Nashville. You know, you got to get your stuff. You got to move with me." So, I'm just starting my career. So, what I did was I just doubled up on my jobs. I was working about 70 to 75 hours a week. I was working Monday through Thursday at one job, 10 hours a day. And then on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I was working from 6 at night to 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I just didn't have anything in the tank. But it served me well because when I moved to Nashville, I came to Franklin, Tennessee, and my first boss was Mark Bussey. He actually really set my career where it is today. So did system administration, networking, and managed over about 2,000 servers, routers, switches, wireless LAN programming, and even forklift management system. I was doing a lot of specialization in security, but it wasn't as specific as I wanted to be. So I came over to Vanderbilt. And at Vanderbilt, I became a principal risk architect and designed third-party risk management, NIST 800-171 program for DoD contractors. We did data use agreements for like DB Gap and HIPAA and so forth. And we actually, secured more than $10 million worth of research grants for the institution. But academia, you can see that ceiling pretty quickly. And for me, I wanted complexity. Remember, I had a near-death experience, so I wanted to be very intentional about what I want to do with my career. So I then expanded my career and went to Cigna. I was a global information security and compliance advisor. I was tasked with developing a state and federal program as well as a HIPAA program to ensure about 1,600 applications complied with the Office of Civil Rights and the HIPAA security rule. However, it was really difficult managing, 5 employees, finishing up a PhD program, and just being a good husband. You want to be able to manage a lot of that. So, I dropped out of that senior manager role and then came over to Deloitte to essentially just reduce my workload and run what we call the secure system development lifecycle. So if you guys come from a DevSecOps background, that's the SSDLC. Now, however, once management came aware of my expertise, after 2 months, that didn't last period. They said, "Look, I want you building programs here too." So I started to re-architect their assurance program and start to globalize it to our various member firms and dev hubs in China, as well as LATAM. We have some in the UK, Australia, and so forth. And so created that program from the ground up, mapped the industry frameworks, obtained about $3.2 million to start funding out and building a team and automate the program. And during that entire span of my professional career, I completed my bachelor's in about 2.5 years. I set a record for completing my master's in just 10 weeks or 2 months. And then I recently completed my doctorate degree in 2 years and 4 months. And so I create content to try to allow other people to do the same thing.
Amazing story. Uh, so many to learn. Definitely, at times, one of the things I really recognize is that so many persons, like within the cybersecurity space, and not just cybersecurity, but just life on the whole, persons will look on and they assume things without really knowing the true story behind all the things that one has to go through. In other words, you having to what they would say pay your dues in order to get to where you are and versus make assumptions. So
Right.
that's a pretty interesting background to your journey to this point. And
Right.
I guess a lot of persons definitely as I recognize in the chat, persons are saying very interesting um, story.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that persons will see the accolades or the all of the achievements, but not really understand the
Right.
process on
Yeah. I
the
mean,
work on the journey to where you are now.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a good segue. And another one of the questions you had was one of the challenges you face along the way that I know a lot of professionals are facing today. And one of the many challenges I faced, one, I'm coming up from the South, so there's not a lot of people who look like me that do what I do. So I try to advocate for
Okay,
that. And
definitely.
you don't really see a lot of people of color hold leadership positions. I also, coming up, I practice stoicism and mindfulness. So I'm always intentional and nice to people. I treat people like they're not going to live tomorrow, and that immediately makes me more empathetic. But that allowed me to progress in my career because coming up as a young black man, you're going to have a lot of passive bigotry and condescension. And what I dealt with more than all of those issues was title bias. So, title bias, in short, occurs when your boss or your superior decides to treat you differently because you don't hold a certain title. And so he would essentially treat his boss with respect. He wouldn't ask condescending questions, but when it comes to you, he would treat you differently because you don't have a
Hmm.
title. Now, being a minority, I don't see that being different from any other form of bigotry. You're just using another attribute to define me and place value. So, what I've been doing here is actually advocating for that. So, like, I give you an example. In my previous position, my supervisor attempted to use like status games to establish dominance over me. One, because I was growing very, very fast, but it tested my stoicism, Rashaya. And he made a lot of condescending statements and questioning my intelligence until one day I changed all that. I asked him, I said, would you speak to me the same if you knew I had cancer or I had a week to live? And he said, of course not. And I said, well, you don't, do you? You haven't taken time to learn about me, what I'm going through, or what I'm dealing with. And I said, you have to understand right now in the pandemic, suicide rates are going up, divorce rates are going up. And do you want to be that additional bit of stress that contributes to someone's unhappiness? And since then, we've had a great relationship. I advocate for that because as a leader, what you say to someone and how you say it doesn't stop right there in that room. They're going to take it home. They're going to take it out on their significant others. They may be a little bit more distant for their kids and so forth. And then in the other case, another thing that's really big for minorities and also women leadership, this happens a lot, is that they're spoken over a lot of times. You ever been in a conversation, you're already talking and someone cuts you off? That actually happens a lot more to minorities than what we care to admit. And in many cases, this is unintentional. However, when you don't have a lot of representation in leadership, it happens even more. So many years ago, what I did is start studying communication science, how to build relationships with people. And I learned a few different strategies I wanted to share with you in the audience to prevent people from being chronic interrupters. So one, being in a virtual world, you have one thing you can do. Keep talking and act like they're on mute. That's number one. Just act like they're on mute. You've already started talking. So finish what you're gonna say. The second thing, call out their name once, then continue speaking afterwards. That's just putting them on notice. And third thing, ask them if they would appreciate if you cut them off while they were speaking. And then point back to your mission statement and your shared values in the companies. They always talk about collaboration and treating others with respect, right? They're a leader, so they have to be bound about those. Now, as a Hail Mary option, if you're a minority, if people continue to do this, this is one thing I've had to do twice, and I've only had to do it twice. When I get cut off a lot, I say, look, I apologize, but I can't allow you to keep cutting me off. Just because my mother, grandmother, and my ancestors have worked really, really hard work to the bone and died just to give me a voice. So it would be absolutely disrespectful to let anyone else take that away from
Yeah, very valuable points. Um, Special, well, I mean, just for as a professional trying to make it um, academically or just trying to make it within the cybersecurity space, and I recognize that a lot of times we have to stand up for our values,
me. Right,
right? Not because of the fact that you want to get ahead or you want to get in, then you settle for anything less. So
right,
having those values, those strong principles are definitely some of those things or elements that will definitely contribute to us in terms of how much we progress and move forward, especially in the fact that for us as persons of color, recognize that the market or the demand for cybersecurity expert is very large or demanding. But at the
Right.
same time, we recognize that for us, it is going to even be more difficult or more challenging to really
Yeah.
prove ourselves on our worth in getting our foot inside the, the,
Rashay,
the, the
it's
yes.
so funny you said that because I remember, I won't mention the name of the company. My actual first name is Reginald. I've always went by Blake. And I remember applying for a lot of jobs as Reginald Curtis and just didn't get the phone call back. But when I applied for Blake Curtis, immediately got the phone call.
Yes.
So now what's funny is you know, it is on the hiring manager, but a lot of it is just not someone being like Caucasian and black. It's just more of a classism thing versus race. And so you're gonna make a lot of inherent bias decisions based on when you hear a name, where they come from. Is that a foreign name? Instead of really perceiving that person as what type of talent they actually have. And you can't really do that on resume. As a matter of fact, the hiring practices that we have today are not equitable. Essentially, what you're doing is you're looking at a resume and making a gut decision whether that person has talent, and then you compound that because you're not really ascertaining objectivity. You're not ascertaining competence. You're ascertaining familiarity, trust. This person reminds you of someone. That's not objective. You're hiring them because of the job description, right? The task on the actual job description. So you can't use years of experience because there's no proof in that. If you're going to be objective, you would have some type of competency assessment in the HR hiring promotion where you're testing them. It could be multiple choice tests, it could be a virtual environment, it could be scenario based questions. And you use that as the first line of actually introducing someone in. Then the second interview, you're focused more on behavioral questions. Are they a good team fit? That is, you have to move to these objective practices because using things like years of experience actually hurts older people, women, Latina women, as well as other minorities. Why? Because we're not exposed into the field as much as everybody else. The other reason why years of experience is not a thing is think about it. 1 year of experience is 8,760 hours. So if it's 8,760 hours, what are you actually working out of the 8,760 hours? Well, if you work 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day, and 52 weeks out the year, you're averaging 2,080. 2,080, 8,760. That means you're automatically given 6,680 hours that you're not working. That's assuming you're not taking any PTO, any time off, or anything else. So it would take you 4 to 6 years to get one quantifiable year of experience. But yet you have the audacity to put it on a job description. Who do you think that hurts? The thing, what it comes down to is out of an 8 hour day too, you're not actually working a lot of it. 2 to 4 hours is actually spent working on the job task. We ran an international study earlier this year for 216 professionals. We could generalize that to about 151,000 people. So 151,000 people are only really performing 4 hours of the task on their job description. So the way to go forward is that you have to create an assessment that is more objective. You can't sit here and rely on hours because it is not going to it's not going to help the workforce gap. The kids of these years have technology that's more available to them than it ever was to us. And so you have to do your job as a profession to move that forward. Now, the only thing I can say, Rochelle, the people who want to go against this are the people who have been grandfathered into the practice, people who have not kept up with it for a long time, right? So if they haven't kept up with it for a long time, when someone else comes in and they're actually performing the task, they're threatening their livelihood. So you will get a little bit of refutation from that. But at the end of the day, it is about being objective, giving the common person the chance and not using subjective things like years of experience. And keep in mind that even academic levels, they don't sufficiently show you how well you perform because they're based on theory. Even the CISSP out there, there was a study a few years ago, 100 plus people who had it, 100 plus people who didn't have it. They didn't outperform it. You're probably like, well, why, Blake? It's a theoretical exam. There's no actual hands-on skills that you do at your job. that's what you as the employer have to build. And hopefully that made sense, but that's where something I'm very passionate about.
Yes, definitely makes a lot of sense because as it relates to one of the greatest challenge for a lot of persons trying to get into the cybersecurity or GRC space, or rather cybersecurity space, is to having to contend, as you have rightly mentioned, with the demands for the years of experience. And these persons are struggling in asking, where can I get 5, 10, 15 years of experience when I'm
Right,
trying to get into this space? And secondly, the certification requirements. And for me, I am not, I will never ever be against certifications.
right,
I have always been a person, so I see certifications as a means of learning,
right,
building on, gaining the skills, gaining the knowledge.
right.
But I was doing some reflections on my life in terms of my journey to where I am.
Mm,
And I must say that even on my current job experiences in the past, most of what I have actually done on the job was
mm,
not contributed to the fact that I have certs,
right,
right? The certs laid the foundation. What counted was the fact that I was willing, I had the humility to learn, to apply.
right,
The organization had a project or they have various problems. So I diagnose a problem. What is it that we are experiencing now? And what is it that is required to solve the problem, to get the
right,
operation, to get the organization moving forward?
right,
That is pretty much where it boils down to. So once you're in that position to apply yourself, then you are able to do what is required, if you
right.
understand what I'm saying.
No, no, I agree with it. I resonate that with that a lot, Shaya. And I think the biggest thing is that the certs, we have to realize why do certification exist. They're not created by state and federal governments. They're created because we have a lack of state and federal government backing. And every other mature profession, there's licenses. And the licenses differ from certifications because they tell you we're going to protect you from incompetent practitioners and you can't practice without them. There's not a regulatory, there's not a statutory requirement that enforces certifications. Outside of you work in the DoD, you have the 8570 list, but even that is still guidance. It's not a law. Now, certifications out there, 85% of them being multiple choice, are not going to give you the hands-on skills. And so that's still being put on the profession. But there's a vicious cycle, right? There's certain certifications you can't even get because they're assuming they want you to have years of experience. Then if you get the certification, you go to the job, they're like, well, you don't have this many years of experience with this certification. So what does that do to professional? It leaves them in the ether. They're sitting here and the only thing they can depend on is people like me and you advocating for them, getting them in front of the right people and someone taking a chance. Here's the things, guys. We don't work in a regulated profession. There's not anybody out there licensing us. If me and Rochelle wanted to become data scientists in the next year, we could set out a certification path and be in there. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. Now it's not a bad thing, but you got to keep in mind that as breaches incidents continue to happen, nobody is licensed or incentivized to stop them. And so what needs to happen is one, the hiring practices have to improve. The way you promote people have to improve. It's really disadvantaging more minorities and women than anything else. But even the people who have been there a long time, just because you live longer on earth, doesn't mean that you are more adequate for that job. What we showed in the study is that you could have 30, 40 years of experience, been in for a while. You don't outperform anybody with 5 or 6 years. Like, why? Well, how are you spending that time? So those are the things we want to really keep in mind here, and we want to move towards objective practices.
Yes, definitely for sure. But thinking about it, I've recognized that there has been a significant shift, possibly maybe within the last, well, for me, talking about me, my experience within the last maybe 4 years, where I recognize, especially in the case of the pandemic,
Mhm.
um, GRC has actually grown significantly in terms of its recognition as
Right.
a pathway into cybersecurity. So I would definitely like for you to share some more on the using GRC as a platform to
Yeah,
get into, or pretty much maybe the share experience about your role in terms of a governance advisor and how all of
yeah,
that ties into helping someone to get in and to moving along that path into
yeah.
becoming more
Like I said,
cybersecurity.
so I mean, I think the biggest thing about GRC is that it can take professionals from many disciplines. You could come from engineering, IT, you could be an accountant, you could be an auditor, and GRC has a home for you. So the governance risk and compliance space is still largely unfilled. And it's needed because remember, IT auditors also fall in this bucket. So we have to certify critical infrastructure. We're out there giving third party attestations and certifications, right? Now, where the gap is that there are not a lot of technical professionals in GRC space. And so most people will say, oh, GRC is an on board to cybersecurity, but they forget where GRC sits. GRC is actually above. GRC is actually establishing the governance, the corporate governance, as well as the performance, the risk appetite, the enterprise profile. Cybersecurity is a set of tooling to address the risks identified by GRC. So it will always be that. So, don't look at GRC as being an on board to cybersecurity. It's much bigger than that. One of my colleagues, Mark Thomas, I call him the governance guru. And what we typically do is we use what we call these different risk scenarios. We use these design factors to identify what an organization is going through. And so we don't even talk about cybersecurity controls until we know about the business. You can't sit here and offer security controls without knowing your gaps. That's like literally buying $1 million house and there's no front door on it, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense. So ways that you can get into this field, one is looking at Isaaca's portfolio. They the one certification that a lot of CIOs don't have and most governance professionals is the C guide. And so the C guide is the certified governance of enterprise IT. It will literally teach you about the business. It's going to teach you how to understand what the strategy is, the portfolio, as well as understanding where DevSecOps fits in and so forth. And then when you start getting those strategic level controls out the way, then you start coming down into the frameworks that you're more familiar with, like the NIST and the ISO and the CIS and the MITRE. But remember, those are more tactical controls. You have to have a layer of governance and management objectives above that. And that's very, very critical. Now, the other thing I would say focus in is how you tailor out your training. Typically, I set up my own portfolio training by the year. So I will have some training that's very agnostic, focused on compliance, governance, risk, cybersecurity, but they're not really tailored for a certain technology. And then I like to pair those with certain vendors. And you can see what the top ones are by looking at job descriptions. So you're always going to see VMware on there. You're always going to see Microsoft Azure. You're going to see Google Cloud, a cloud platform, and AWS. And so you want to tailor those because you're going to get that theoretical knowledge that I was talking about, right? Something that's just very, very vague, but then you got to tie it to actual controls and actual platforms because that's what you're auditing and implementing and assessing. So that is a good way to get in there. Communities to join is get on LinkedIn as well as Isaac and Engage. I'm actually the global topic leader of the COVID and governance. So you can get on there, chat with me on there. IC Square, there's a lot of alumni resources. So whenever you guys are graduating, go back and check in. There's scholarships to I Am Safe. I Am Safe actually partners with IC Square. A lot of minority scholarship opportunities, a lot of women's scholarship opportunities as well. And then other than that, you want to get perspective. Don't listen to one person. Don't even just listen to me. Look at people who work in GRC. Look at people working in IT. Look at people working in cyber. Get that collective perspective to figure out just how you want to tailor your career. What's worked best for me though, is since I came from an implementing background, the very same technologies that I audit, I understand when someone's not being forthcoming. I know how to interpret the technical evidence. And even if I didn't, I know what resources I can go find. Now, the reason why this is important is because we recently found a significant gap in the Big Four, specifically with IT auditors. And so our assessment, we broke out about 20 different assessment questions. Some were based on declarative knowledge, which are just theory, you mean definitions, scenarios, multiple choice examples you would get in the certification. And then we tied those with practical questions. You being able to actually take least privilege and SOD and then verify that in an AWS platform, in a Linux platform, in a Microsoft. What we found was within the Big Four, is that we actually barely have competence just on declarative knowledge, just theory, speaking about least privilege and SOD. But we had a negative 26% decline when it came to applying those same skills to specific technologies, modern technologies, Shaya. We're not even talking about emerging technologies and artificial intelligence, cognitive networks, IoT, and so forth. Now, what's scary about that is that the assessment questions were linked to controls that prevent data breaches. And every data breach was linked to the top 10 national ones of the past 10 years. So you had the things like the Marriott data breach, you had the things like the Equifax data breach, right? And so every time they didn't hit those questions, they were increasing data breach likelihood. This is the last line of defense we have. So these guys are responsible for protecting power, water, communication, and banking. So this is why the GRC space is very, very high, because cybersecurity professionals don't certify critical infrastructure. GRC professionals actually certify critical infrastructure.
Very important points there. There's a question in the chat. Someone is asking, I can currently afford certifications, but I'd like a resource where I can practice GRC skills.
Great
Is there
question.
such? Yeah.
Yeah, so one is going to be Isaac Engage. One, we actively talk about active solutions. We have regular chats, we do video chats. I think there's another guy on LinkedIn. He actually has a GRC educational program out there. And what I can also do, I can share some other links, but there's another organization called OCEG. They have a few government certifications. I would
Yes.
also start looking at Blue Team, because Blue Team, it can still be, even though it's cyber related, it's going to help you as a GRC professional. And they have a lot of practical labs out there, as well as going to Udemy. So Udemy, even though most of it's going to be, people creating their own content. If you have a .edu address, like you come from a school or you're with a certain company, try that address. A lot of that content is free for you. It's also free for you on LinkedIn as well. So try to use your business emails for that as well. And then lastly, if you start Googling like, GRC mappings, there are people out there on YouTube that do exactly what I do. We take frameworks, we create them out, we walk you through them, and we'll actually show you what a real life audit looks like. And really just finding passionate people. If you reached out to me, I take time out my day and schedule. I mean, Rashad, he just reached out to me last week. I'll take time to walk you through what I know and also hand you those resources.
Yeah, and that's very important because that's one of the things that I am definitely working towards to get to that point where persons within the community who have the skill sets
Right,
are able to come together in settings like these and to pretty much share and to help each other to grow and to learn from each other's experience. And
right,
so that is definitely something that I'll be reaching out to you more for in terms of helping persons within the community to get their hands what they would say dirty to get that experience.
right,
But one of the things is that experience is not just about being in the job, but also being able to show outside of the job the things that you are able to do and to
right.
itemize those things on a resume or in whatever way possible.
Yeah.
I think you
You
might have mentioned. Okay, go ahead.
No, I loved what you said. It's not about just how long you've been in a job, being able to actually show value, what you can generate. And I think that's a good segue for, people always heard about the 10,000 hour rule, and I had to do 10,000 hours, I can be an expert. And like me and another guy recently LinkedIn post, he believed that was science. Like 10,000 hour rule is not based on any science. It was by a journalist. And unfortunately, what happens is in our field, we don't have a lot of doctors. We don't have a lot of cybersecurity professionals. What you're working on is hearsay, what someone else says. So there's not a lot of statistics behind it. One thing I promote is getting down to the science. The reason why we're on this video chat right now, the reason why we're working with these tools is because there are scientists out there, but we don't know who they are. But me as a scientist, I had to be able to break down why things work, why they don't work. If you think about 10,000 hour rule, the one thing that's really fallacious about it is because the gentleman who actually looked at the study, Malcolm Gladwell, the journalist, He took another study that was popularized by Anders Ericsson. And Anders Ericsson has a book out there called Peak, The Science of the New Expertise. Great read. I want you guys to definitely go out there and read it. But one thing about that book, he said, Malcolm Gladwell essentially took a study about 8 to 10, 18-year-old violinists, one of the hardest instruments to play in the world. And instead of just checking in with Anders about how to generalize those results, he then applied it and said, that's why everybody else is successful. You're going to have the people like Bill Gates. You're going to have the people like Steve Jobs. And he said, okay, or the Beatles. The problem is that 10,000 hours of just non-deliberate intentional practice, it's just going through the motions. We all have 10,000 hours of driving. We don't work in NASCAR. We all have 10,000 hours of security. We're not cybersecurity professionals. So the thing is, the 10,000 hours was an arbitrary number. Matter of fact, there are these people called mnemonists or these memory practitioners or memory athletes. Back in the 70s and 60s, the longest serial number of items you can remember is about 80. And it only took the guy around about 300 hours. So think about that. If it only took him 300 hours to learn that, then no, the 10,000 hour rule doesn't really apply either. But now people are remembering numbers up to 320, 350, and so forth. So the hours is not really what you need to be focused on. Focus on the task, your ability to monitor what you're doing, because sometimes we're just doing random tasks. We're not really in tune. We're not engaging in any type of metacognition. And think about how you need to improve it. And then be honest with yourself. If you've hit a plateau, like the same way you would in the weight room, do I need to get an expert who can measure me, to watch what I'm doing, to find those little nuances that I'm not improving, and then set me on that path? In psychology, what we do is we reverse engineer expertise to make it easier for the next generation of professionals. So when you hear about hours and years, scientists don't use time to measure experience. We use what you can do. We use the number of times you do it. And then we try to figure out what exactly is he not doing right? Is there a certain technique he's not doing? And we just keep improving.
Yeah, well, definitely well said. Uh, One of the questions, I think there was a question that was asked. Someone was asking, can you explain? I think this person wanted for you to explain in definite terms how you got into GRC specifically, as they are trying to get into the field as a younger individual, and it seemed to be having a challenge.
Yeah, I can speak about why I did it, and I can tell you how I got in there. So why I did it, I was that kid who liked being in everybody else's business. I like I like getting into everybody else's business, breaking stuff, right? And so in GRC and auditing, your primary job is to review everybody else's work. Love that, right? Now to get into it, one, you have to figure out does my particular practice, whether I'm a system administrator, whether I'm a security analyst, does it ever touch compliance? Does it ever touch governance? And then you want to start thinking about, well, the people that you're working with, building relationships with those people at your job who do these things, and figure out certain projects. So specifically, when I was at Mars, there was a lot of different compliance projects, and I knew I wanted to be in GRC. I made sure I reached out to them on LinkedIn. I made sure I knew what type of projects they were doing, and I tried to create value for them because these people were going to create value for me years down the road. Now, when I got into Vanderbilt, I was always curious. And so I would say the biggest skill you're ever going to have is be curious and be empathetic. Because what my leader saw was he's somebody who didn't say no. And so you're going to you have to do a lot of things you don't want to do to get where you want to go. And what came out of it, I was presented with an opportunity to learn about compliance on the job. And so I set out, got my own certification in CISA. I then started learning more about NIST. I started attending every webinar. And then my resume stopped sounding like an engineer. It stopped sounding like an analyst because now I was able to tweak that language based on what I knew, what I could articulate, and what I was doing at my job. You start compounding that with all the certifications you're getting and the growth, and you're always trying to outperform, then all those rewards and accolades and your communication and behavior, then create a portfolio for yourself. So when you get ready to then try to find your GRC job, you need to find the people who already work there. You need to build a relationship with them. You need to attend the same conferences they attend. Why? Those are your references. When you do get ready to apply for that job, they're the people who are going to advocate for you. And statistically, we will hire more people that we know. That's just the way it goes. And so until we have objective, equitable practices that assess you on what you know in the hiring process, your biggest skill right now is to be the most empathetic and communicable person you can be today. That's number one.
So, and that's a very valuable point. So, pretty much having that strong networking. A lot of time, I think persons are thinking about they want to start what they would say things perfect.
Right,
They want to have everything lined up perfectly before they actually step to getting to where they want to. But you shared a
right,
very important point about the networking, getting around persons, getting in a circle, reaching out to persons within
right,
all these platforms. And I must also share that a lot of the skills that I've also acquired is as a result of, or even getting into cybersecurity, the GRC space, is as a result of reaching out to persons like yourself, right? I mean, reaching out to persons like what's his name, Gerald. I think Dr. Gerald,
yeah,
um, who is on Simply Cyber. Persons like those, I reach out to many persons like these who have actually helped me along the way, like Ken Underhill, all these individuals
yeah,
to steer me. So mentorship is also a very valid thing that you have
right,
mentioned to get along this path. So
yeah.
to
And I'm
pretty much yes.
right, and I think those are you named three up and coming people right there. So you got Ken, you got Gerald, myself from the scientific space. But there's one thing we all have in common. We just want to make your life easier for the hiring practices. So while they're giving you the books out there, and Gerald has a great book out there about how to start a profession, I think Ken just came out with a
Hmm.
book as well. He collaborated. Me, I'm trying to remove obstacles out of your way, like years of experience and old people who have been in the practice who are really trying to assess you based on what's familiar to them. I think that triple threat is going to help. But until we can get these things more in practice, until I can start influencing legislation and academia, the biggest thing you're going to have is your networking. That's the biggest goal. And then once you do start become proficient, you're raising up. You need to give back. If you notice, I would have had still a decent career if I just would have focused on that. But what I do now is publish, not publish regularly. One thing that teaching allows you to do is to assess how much you really know. At the same time, while you're fielding questions in the chat, that also gives me more perspective. And so I get to use your questions, your feedback to help another person. I get to use my publications, my videos, my platform to help another person. Why? Because we didn't have these individuals when we were growing up. And so we have to do our part to introduce equitable practices and introduce more opportunities for people like yourself.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Uh, Another question we have is what projects would you say one should put on a resume to get a job? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
So,
an
yeah,
interesting question.
no, no, it's a great question. I remember a few years ago, as I was building out my resume, it was so focused on what I could do and what I led. And then I had projects, but the one thing I didn't put on the projects is what they generated in revenue and how big they were. So if you do have projects, and even if you were just a contributor to that project, you need to take time to ask your manager as well as the project manager, hey, what is the scope of this project? How many people did it affect? What type of revenue did it generate? And that needs to be a part of your portfolio. Why? Because the company that's going to hire you is not just going to see, oh, he did a project in Azure. He did a project in Azure that generated $1.5 million. And it took this many people. And he talked about how he had different relationships he had to build, different cultures he had to come overcome, different contention. They want people who can communicate well, handle big issues, but also lead major initiatives. So when you're listing your projects out there, doesn't matter if it's compliance related, if it generated value, if it had a huge impact on the school, go get those metrics. So typically, value generated, how many people, scope, as well as you may want to note major issues that you had to overcome. Because when they're hiring you, they want to know that you can handle those same turbulent situations.
Okay, definitely. Good, valuable points there as well. Uh, just to Well, you have actually covered a number of important pointers. I have actually learned some, taking another perspective and moving forward based on a lot of the things that you have mentioned. And I would definitely look forward also to those additional resources that I could also share with the community, those links.
Mhm.
Whatever resources that you have, then I would definitely be using those, sharing those within the network, within the community.
Right.
Um, as what final advice would you share with the
Mm,
persons that are really thinking about entering into the cybersecurity space?
yeah.
Is there anything towards their personal development, their mindset, the sort of mindset that they should have? I
Yeah.
mean, resources that they need to be studying, things that they need to be doing in particular to really guide them or steer them into really
Yeah.
landing a career in this pathway.
I love this question, Rochelle. And so, yeah, I can speak to length on this one. Before I get into the technical skills, I want you guys to think about emotional regulation. You coming up in the field, you being younger, and you're gonna be crossed with a lot of people who are gonna be condescending and passive, and you're also in one of the most complex environments in the world. And so, one thing that will help you is like when you're getting upset at work, well, when someone has said something you don't like, you need to take really stock of why those things bother you. And what I could really promote out there, there's a book in Stoicism, and it's by Massimo Pigliucci, and I'll send a link later. But what it is about self governance. So, for example, there's only three things in your control. You got your thoughts and judgment, which is in one. You can't really control what anybody else does. Your second, which gets you in trouble, are your impulses. Your impulses, and when something happens, before you think, you just react. You don't think about it. Sometimes you can press the pause button. You don't need to respond. Even when I've been insulted, one of the best things you can say is, "Hey, when you said that, how did you want me to feel?" That's not a typical question, but it creates introspective for that person. Like, did I just defend that person? The second thing you can do is say, hey, do you mind giving me a few minutes or a few hours to really think about what you said and how you said it? I want to make sure I'm respectful when I respond back to you. What you're doing is establishing consistency. You're establishing a culture that you don't really stand for disrespect, right? And the third thing on there is this your will to avoid something or your will to pursue something. Outside of that, really, misfortune, sadness, anger does not exist. Think about something. If Rashaya says something disrespectful for me, that first person probably just think impulsively. My first question is like, hey, what made you say that? Was there something that you observed that allowed you to feel comfortable saying that? You always want to treat these as learning opportunities instead of being impulsive. Why? Because that's what people remember you for. No matter how good of a professional you are, they remember how you act and how you communicate with them. And so you will have a lot more opportunities open to yourself if you're more emotionally stable. That's the first thing I would say. Outside of that is all the people that are helping you, you need to reciprocate that value. He at the same time, I may be helping Rashay, but he's also helping me. I'm able to talk to you guys. I'm able to get my message out. I'm able to get more backing around things that I care about, right? But that also creates value for you. Now I hope that you also do the same thing and share it with your friends. You need to keep that value going. And then your advice for aspiring professionals: seek out apprenticeships, especially if you're in your last years of college. Big Four are really good on that. Big tech, so your Amazons of the world, your Facebook, Netflix, Google, as well as Deloitte's, KPMG's. They're all about apprenticeships, and they're lowering barriers to you for you to get in. So consider doing that. Also, act on contract opportunities for the people who are wanting to get in GRC. Even though there's some questionable contract opportunities out there that are short, it's experience nonetheless.
Mhm.
Um, what I did, I doubled up. I had the bandwidth. I didn't have any kids, so you said, you know what? I'll work these hours. I'm just gonna have to be on a better diet and have a lot of coffee. But when you're first starting out, some of those things are necessary. And at the same time, join communities, actively talk about things. Zach and Jay engage, IC squared, and then just participate as much in your local community. The more and more that your name pops up and the more you're known, the less you have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, very valid, very important points there, and to be noted, for sure. Let me see. I think this person is saying that I am trying to get into the GRC route as a fresher, as I'm currently jobless.
Mm,
All right, so that's one of the challenge that we have, right?
right,
Trying
right,
to help persons to really become creative in trying to get into this space. Trying
right,
to Creativity, I recognize, is one of the greatest things that you can actually use, although challenging it is. Right, it's just a matter of being creative and trying to reach out to create that strong bond, that network within the community. I mean,
right,
things might not happen for you as quickly as you want, but if you only be persistent, then things will definitely go in a different or more positive direction. Because I
right,
am a testimony of that today in terms of where I was and the guidance that I have received from many persons from within this space that have really put me in a better place today than I was maybe a few years ago.
right. And I like how you said that. The other thing is, we think we have to do this by ourselves. We don't. There's plenty of people out there who would just love to help you talk through it. I remember one colleague I had, and he's like, Blake, I'm just trying to break into cyber right quick, and I keep applying these jobs, and I don't know why they're not hiring me. I said, well, send me your resume. Let me take a look at it. And his resume was good, but it was how he was wording things. So he said, worked on this, learned that. I said, your verbs are hurting your resume. If you've led something, say the word you've led. If you created something, say the word foster. If you created a new environment, say the word create. I said people want creative, driven people. But your language is sounding like you're more of a part of the environment instead of creating the environment. So one is look at your resume. The other thing is get out there to people who are established, ask them to share their resume with you. Mimic it, get experience, try to get some backing off of it. Also, when you're applying for certain jobs, see what consistently pops up. So you always want to try to land on one or two programming languages. You're always going to see the Javas. You're always going to see the Pythons of the world. So that's something you need to put in your toolkit. But then those same certs, we always call them the C certifications because they always start out with a C. Get those. I mean, do all of them improve performance? No, they're not scientifically proven. But the job that's going to hire you, they obviously value them. So get those. If you're looking for the training out there, understand there's a lot of free training on Udemy. There's a lot on LinkedIn. There are people who will guide you through it. I actually teach learning methodologies and memory optimization. And one of the things I would promote as you're studying is a tool called Anki, Anki. So Anki is a spaced repetition memory note taking card. So essentially, say me and Rashay was practicing 20 note cards, right? And he had two note cards, and he already knew the answers. He didn't need to review them. It's a self grading mechanism. He can just mark it as easy. He won't see those note cards until maybe next week. But the ones he's stumbling on, he sees those more often. So he's able to prioritize his learning throughout the day, and he knows exactly what he's weak in. Versus you sitting there reading the entire book over and over again and thinking, why is it not sinking into my head? That's not our way our brains work. The other thing is when you're creating memories and you're encoding them, remember that the brain itself doesn't remember average everyday things. It doesn't do novelty. What it remembers is things that are outlandish. Like you ever like drove, 30 minutes to get to your house and you don't really remember what you saw on the way there, how you even pulled into the driveway because you were thinking about everything else. Well, that is called automaticity. Your brain is operating a 3-ton vehicle subconsciously. You're not even present. And that should scare you. But if someone ran across the street naked, you would remember that, right? You remember that for 20 years from now, but you can't remember what socks you had on last week or shirts. So what I'm telling you is when you're encoding certain things, like you're trying to learn the TCP/IP network, or you're trying to remember your OSI model, when you're thinking about these terms, turn them into really weird things that you will remember. For me, when I was learning the COVID framework, and I had the build, acquire, implement, and the plan and organize. I had different things for them. So if a BAI control came up in COVID, there was a big yellow Tonka truck. Well, Blake, that sounds funny. No, it makes it memorable. And that's the key. All knowledge is the root of memory. Without memory, there is no knowledge. And so what I was able to do, as soon as you said BAI 01, I knew that was going to be managed programs. I just managed a big tucker truck, picking up a program and putting it somewhere. Although that is weird, my memory is very, very quick to recall. And one thing I always get called out on is at work is like, Blake, what are you eating? What are you doing to have this memory? Dude, there's books out there about improving your memory. One is by Harry Lorraine. He's one of my favorite out there. There's another one called Moonwalking with Einstein about Joshua Ford. Joshua Ford just studied memory for 6 months and actually worked with the same guy, Anders Ericsson. Remember the expertise I was telling you about? And he won the United States Championship in memory the very next year. Now think about that. If you're improving your memory and you're working with frameworks, you're working with GRC, you start becoming the expert. The reason why I finished my bachelor's in 2.5 years, the reason why I finished my master's in 2 months, the reason why I went to finish my doctorate in 2 years is because of my memory techniques. And people are like, well, that's not real knowledge. No, it's the foundation of knowledge. If you can't remember anything, you can't learn.
That's I think that's one of the most potent points of this this discussions. Very important, and I know for sure that I definitely will be dedicating just one session, one discussion on this topic. I think this is something that is very valuable for persons, especially along the certification path. A lot of persons are challenged,
Right,
not the fact that they do not want to do certifications, but they are scared of not being able to recall all of these things when there's
right,
definitely a science behind it. So this is
right.
definitely something that I will be looking into along with you for sure, to
Yeah.
really have something like this to help the community along the way. Very,
Yeah.
very valid point.
And Rashay, if you want to in the future, if we want to discuss, memory techniques, some of the solutions that I use, we can showcase those. Another solution for you guys to look out to is Notion. I recently put up a post about that, how I organize my goals and my life activities around that. So, Rashay, if you want to have a session on that and walk through that, or work through my memory encoding system, which is literally an Anki, um, we can do that. Now, what's cool about having Anki specifically is that every note card I've ever took, every practice test, I then made note cards out of it. And people are, why you got 6,000 something note cards? Why would you do that? Well, when I get ready to prepare for an interview, what do you think I'm doing? I'm literally going for a quick search in there. If it's on privacy, I haven't studied privacy maybe 3, 4 years. So I know based on the forgetting curve, and look up Herming Ebbinghaus, the forgetting curve, I'm going to lose 40 to 60% of that because the certification is a point in time assessment. So what I'm going to do for this upcoming interview is I'm going to create a custom set of note cards based on the job description there, right? And I'm going to go over those. And if I'm having a hard time remembering those when I start creating those weird memories, maybe there's some weird memory of a naked person running across the street. There's a tongue, something. And the reason why you want to make it weird is because when you're taking an exam or in there, when you get that question, you're gonna laugh in your mind because you already know the answer because it's so strange. But this is why I'm saying, whatever you're learning, don't practice for the exam. Practice for life. You're gonna have this many years later. The only reason why I'm even able to tell you what I know right now is because even for this interview, went to my Anki note cards. I knew there was Shay was going to ask me certain questions. I knew there were certain preferences I wanted to give him. So I had it all right here. That helps me be more valuable to you guys. But you got to make sure that years from now, if you're going to invest thousands of dollars in what you're learning, then don't lose it. Keep it on hand.
Very valuable point and note to end our conversation on. Let me say that it was a pleasure. I have learned a lot. Um, it was indeed very valuable information that you have actually shared with us. And no doubt all the persons that were online definitely appreciate all the information that you have poured into us, the value that you have added to us. And I definitely appreciate it. And we will definitely be in touch for future discussion, because right now you have actually given me a lot of insights to more interesting um, things to discuss going forward that can definitely be of value to us within the cybersecurity community.
Awesome. Wow, I appreciate you guys for having me as well. Like I said, you guys have any questions, reach out. FAQs to Rashea, let them know, and I'll provide those links as well. But like I said, guys, keep learning, keep sharing, and just keep striving out there.
All right, so guys, that's it for us on Cyber JA, and very importantly for persons who might have the time tomorrow is tomorrow we will be launching the what we call review of cybersecurity and GRC ebooks and white papers. Right, so that's one of the initiatives that I have in which persons within my Discord server as well. We come together and we discuss the issues,
Mm,
various ebooks about cybersecurity and white papers and what we can learn, as well as to add to our experience, as well as to add to the work environment and for our own personal development. So I definitely be putting a link in the chat that persons can actually see when that session starts. I think sometime tomorrow. You can actually follow on that. Yes. So, guys, that's it. And thank you so very much, Dr. Blake, for taking the time out to share with us on
thank
Cyber
you.
J. Really appreciate it.
Until next time, guys.
Okay, bye. All right. Take care, guys.